There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
What in the world is going on? I'm your host, Richard Schaff. Our program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. Today on our program, I want to bring you a report that I got from Dr. James Dobson. Dr. Dobson was the founder of Focus on the Family. He left there, I believe, in about 2012. I've met him personally, been in the same group of men with him, men and women, know him somewhat personally, and those of you that are a little older that remember back to Focus on the Family, we all remember him as a trusted servant. He sent out the following, and I want to share it with you, this following letter. He noted that voters across this nation are only a few short weeks away from the next general election. What an ominous time this is, he noted, for our 244-year-old republic. Its future hangs in the balance. The choices we make on November 3rd will send this nation down one of two dramatically different paths. The wrong decision will be catastrophic. I agree with Dr. Dobson, and he agrees with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, which I also agree with. When who said recently that the next election will be, quote, the most important since 1860. Gingrich also warned that if we appease or ignore the violence and anarchy occurring in the streets, it might be the end of civilization as we've known it. Those are sobering words coming from a man who stood at the pinnacle of national power at one time. Mr. Gingrich referred to the significance of 1860 because that was the year Abraham Lincoln was elected president. I'm sure the speaker would agree that the following election of 1864 was also critical to the future of the nation. Lincoln and his opponent, Major General George McClellan, were in a hotly contested campaign for the White House that, well, it really could have gone either way. The war between the states, as it was called, has been raging for 3 ghastly years at that time, and the entire nation was staggered by reports from the bloody battlefield. Lincoln was running for a second term, and he campaigned on the promise of finishing the war and preserving the Union. These were momentous times for the young nation. During the first week of January 1863, the president signed the Emancipation of Proclamation that freed the slaves. Democrats and their presidential candidate, Major General McClellan, initially campaigned on a peace platform. There they pledged to end the war and send soldiers home. As the election approached, he talked more about negotiating to let the South establish a separate government whose cornerstone would be slavery. If McClellan had been elected, there would have been no foreseeable end to the inherent evil of buying and selling human beings and treating them like cattle. Thus, the Civil War was a struggle for the soul of our country. The summer before the 64 election, 1864 that is, the war was going badly for the Union. Lincoln, in fact, was convinced he was going to lose the election. He wrote the following memo on August 23, 1864, asking that his cabinet get ready to accept the grim prospects of his re-election. These are his words, and I'm going to read it to you. A quote. This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be reelected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect as to save the Union between the election and the inauguration, as he, my opponent, will have secured his election on such grounds that I cannot possibly save it afterwards. Remind you of today, folks? Sure does me. No wonder Lincoln dealt at times with depression. Clearly, the Union was a hair's breadth away from losing the war. But then, the tide began to turn. One historian wrote, quote, "The political landscape shifted dramatically when General William T. Sherman took Atlanta in early September. This major military shift, coupled with the severe internal strife within the Democrat Party, solidified Lincoln's chance at victory. As you know, Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans won the election of 1864 in a landslide. McClellan was defeated by more than 500,000 popular votes and 191 electoral votes. An estimated 78% of the Union soldiers cast their ballots in favor of Lincoln. McClellan just took 3 states, Kentucky, Delaware, and his home state of New Jersey. Less than 2 months later, after Lincoln's inauguration, he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln is said to have been the last casualty of the Civil War. Why have I recounted our Civil War history in the election of 1864 at this time in our history? It's for 2 reasons. The first is to consider some striking similarities between then and now. Our nation is divided like no time since the Civil War. Lawlessness and anarchy stalk the cities as angry mobs burn, riot, loot, kill innocent bystanders. Cultural monuments are being destroyed. Scores of people have been shot. Our courageous police officers are being brutally attacked by the same people that they vowed to protect. A man and his son stopped to ask for direction, and he was gunned down on the spot. A 1-year-old baby was shot in the stomach while he sat in his stroller. The child later died at the hospital. What began as a justified and lawful protest in response to George Floyd's senseless murder by a rogue police officer has morphed into violence for the sake of violence. Hatred flows in the streets, some, including some of the worst slurs possible, directed at the President of the United States or anyone who dares to support him or his policies. Constitutional rights to freedom of speech and religious liberty are being trampled. There's also widespread belief that violence and anarchy are being organized and funded by powerful forces that are maneuvering America toward a socialistic dictatorship. There's always a kingmaker behind such lawlessness. Most disturbing is open talk of another civil war. Folks, it's troubling to even utter these words. The last time that Americans faced off against each other, over 600,000 soldiers died. May God forbid that from happening again. During the revolution of the 1960s, I recall a bumper sticker that read, "What if they gave a war and nobody came?" It was a catchy phrase. Made sense to those who opposed the Vietnam War. My reaction to them and now is, what if they gave a war and only one side came? That question keeps me awake at night. You see, folks, there are millions, multiple millions of passive Americans out there today, many of them Christians, who are clueless about what is happening to our homeland. They're losing something precious and irreplaceable. Don't they understand that their children and those who are yet to be born will live in tyranny if we fail them on this watch, our watch? Countless young men and women have laid down their lives on battlefields around the world to protect liberty and our way of life. Now, what they purchased for us with their blood is slipping away. Disengaged people won't lift a finger to preserve this great land. They won't even take a few minutes to go to their polling places to vote. There are also thousands of pastors who won't allow voting registration tables in the lobbies of their churches. Don't they know or care that America is on the ropes? Hordes of angry anarchists are salivating over the next election. They're hoping to push America over a cliff. If they succeed, as Newt Gingrich said, Western civilization will never recover. Is there anyone left who believes some things are worth dying for? Aren't there patriots out there such as Patrick Henry, who said in defiance of British tyranny, quote, "Give me liberty or give me death"? That was a spirit during his day. The Declaration of Independence closed with these words endorsed by the signers: "We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." They knew they'd be hanged if they lost the war. Why did they do that? You know why? Because they loved their country enough to die for it. How I pray for the emergence of silent, intimidated Americans who are going to come out of their hiding places and let their voices be heard on Election Day 2020. There must be tens of thousands of ministers in our midst who, like the black-robed regiment of the Revolutionary War, will strip off their religious garb and fight valiantly for righteousness and for religious liberty. If these men and women of faith and conviction don't come to the rescue of their country, folks, it's doomed. During the Civil War, untold soldiers gave their lives to preserve the integrity of the United States of America and end the tragedy of slavery. Here's the question of the hour now. Are you and our brothers and sisters willing to carry the blood-stained banner around which our predecessors rallied around? We'll know the answer to that question on November 3rd. That brings us to the second reason I've addressed the Civil War and the election of 1864. It's to remind us that voting matters. Each presidential campaign has been important, but some have had jaw-dropping and nation-shaping consequences. I believe that we're in such a pivotal moment now. You can be certain that America will be forever changed by the political party that gets its supporters to the polls. They'll win the day and the future. Unfortunately, the majority of Christians have a record of not showing up on Election Day. It's unbelievably sad. As many as 75% of them sit on their hands, apparently assuming that their votes don't matter. How wrong they are. Voting always matters. George Bush won the presidency in 2000 by 537 votes in a nation of 130 million registered voters. Many down-ballot contests have been won or lost by a single vote. I plead with you to register and vote in this presidential election. I won't try to tell you who to vote for because you can figure that out for yourselves. But I will suggest how you might evaluate the situation we face. I'll close, says Dr. Dobson, with several critical issues that have stunning significance for the nation. Please think about them and then go to the polls. Think of the next generation. There's a fierce battle being waged right now in the nation's classroom for the hearts and souls of our children and grandchildren. Those of us who are passionately committed to the Judeo-Christian system of beliefs are losing our kids right before our eyes. They're being force-fed a radical curriculum that's godless, anti-American, and sexually perverse. Make no mistake, the left and secular culture are manipulating the minds of your sons and daughters every day of the year. I urge you to be extremely careful about those whom you set in power over your children. Protect them with your very lives. And then there's the sanctity of human life. All life is sacred and is a gift from Almighty God. But as you know, America has the blood of innocence on its hands. Since 1973, more than 60 million babies have been murdered through abortion, and countless lives have ended by euthanasia. This is the most tragic Holocaust in the history of the world. Some states have even passed laws allowing wounded and suffering infants to lie alone on the porcelain trays later after somehow surviving unsuccessful abortions. These precious ones will die without the comfort of their mother's breasts. If that doesn't touch your heart, you are truly without compassion. I hope you'll not cast a single vote for any politician who supports such wickedness. And then look at marriage and the family. The family is God's original building block for society. Marriage continues to serve as the foundation for every dimension of human life. Everything of value rests on it, including procreation and the care and training of our children. If that ground floor is weakened or undermined, the whole superstructure of civil society will come crashing down. But listen carefully, powerfully, and highly funded forces, including LGBTO and other leftist entities. They're determined to destroy the family as an institution. It's already on its knees, and its future's grim. Before you vote, find out what position the candidates have taken on this issue. Then vote accordingly. And then, good listeners, think about religious liberty. The first item on the Bill of Rights addresses the issues of religious liberty. All the other ecumenical rights flow from that fundamental freedom. That's why it's alarming to recognize that this right to worship and honor God as we choose, why it's under such vicious attack today. The courts have done the greatest damage, but now an entire subculture is trying to bring down the Christian faith. Whether it's invaded your private world or not, really, folks, it's already at your front door. If this was the primary concern that led to the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War in 1776, yes. We can't compromise one jot or tittle within this fundamental right. Fight for it with every ounce of your strength and determination. Don't let the government close the doors of your church or tell you when you can sing praises to our Almighty Lord. They've got a devious agenda, and it's dangerous. Be ready to go to the mat in defense of what you believe. And let this passion influence how you cast your ballot in November. Here I stand. Will you join me? And then compare capitalism to socialism. It's difficult to believe that for the first time in American history, our nation appears to be thinking about trading our democratic way of life for the tyranny of socialism. I can hardly catch my breath. Could we really be considering abandoning the beloved system of government that was designed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people? Is it true that up to 40% of millennials and others are prepared to surrender their liberties in exchange for the absolute authority of the state? Democracy and capitalism have made ours the most powerful and successful nation in the history of the world. Are we really considering scuttling the system? The one that served us for 244 years in exchange for what some people now call free stuff? I pray not. But that option awaits you in the polling booth this November. And then look at the judicial system. Given recent rulings, we know that judicial overreach has almost ruined this great nation. Justices and judges are constitutionally charged to interpret the law, but not make law. But again and again, they've overstepped their authority and brought us atrocities such as abortion on demand, same-sex marriage, and the so-called, quote, separation of church and state, which incidentally, folks, does not appear anywhere in the Constitution. Most recently, the Supreme Court handed down one of its most ridiculous and offending rulings since Roe versus Wade. It's the case of Bostock versus Clayton County. This decision was not based on constitutional law, but on the whims of 6 justices. It created a new definition of sex out of thin air. Lawyers tell us that this ruling will affect every dimension of culture and haunt the nation as long as it endures. Please, folks, don't vote for politicians who will expand rather than limit the power of the judiciary. And then look at our national view of the nation of Israel. Scripture tells us those who bless Israel will be blessed. Take a look at Genesis 12:3. Our prayer is that our next chief executive of the U.S. will continue to promote and cultivate a vibrant bond of friendship with the nation of Israel, which is our only ally in the Middle East. Anti-Semitism and all forms of racial discrimination are inherently evil, and we condemn them categorically. We're a nation that's dedicated to freedom and justice for all. It's in our Pledge of Allegiance, you know. Dr. Dobson notes that he could list dozens of other issues that should be considered as we vote on November 3rd. But he says that he'll end with this final statement from Abraham Lincoln, where President Lincoln said, quote, "I am not bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I am not bound to succeed, but I'm bound to live by the light that I have." Now I ask of you, let us come boldly before the throne of grace and ask for God to show his mercy on America. Sincerely, James Dobson. That meant a lot when I saw it, folks. I wanted to share it with you. and I thought it was timely. And now just a short addition. I got to mention the vice president candidate that was nominated by the Democrats, Kamala Harris. Did you know that she's rated by a watchdog as one of the most radical leftist senators last year? In fact, she was the only senator rated by nonpartisan GovTrack as having a perfect progressive record. The current narrative from mainstream media following the announcement that Senator Harris is Joe Biden's running mate is that she's, quote, a pragmatic moderate. That, my friends, is a joke. They looked up the record on Capitol Hill. It was worse than expected. They went to GovTrack, that's a nonpartisan tracker of government activities. They look at every vote on Capitol Hill and determine whether a vote is considered right or left. Then they score the lawmakers based on a score of 0 to 1, with 1.0 being totally conservative and 0.0 being totally progressive. In 2017, the first year in the Senate, Harris ranked 93 out of 100. That means only 7 other senators voted more often in a leftist manner. The following year, she made up ground and jumped to 96th. But it was last year when she reached her goal of being the most progressive voting senator on Capitol Hill by scoring 0.00. She voted as far to the left as possibly literally every time throughout the year. Even Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren had not been able to do that. Kamala Harris has spent her entire life in D.C. trying to be the most woke social justice senator on Capitol Hill. Her record doesn't say pragmatic moderate. Her record reveals she's a radical progressive and a neo-Marxist. Don't be fooled, folks, and remember it when you go into the voting booth. In closing, I received something recently from Franklin Graham. I want to share it with you. Only God can save us from socialists and communists. Franklin Graham announced on the Todd Starnes radio show that he's calling for a national prayer march in Washington, D.C. Graham, the president of Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, said our national lawmakers need to see the presence of the church in Washington. A quote, Franklin Graham said, "Our country is deteriorating. We are in a nosedive. If God doesn't save us, there is no hope." End quote. This march is scheduled to begin at 12 o'clock on September 26th, less than 2 months before the presidential election. There will not be any speeches or musicians, only prayer, Graham said. The only hope for this nation is not President Trump, is not a politician. The only hope for this country is God. A quote from Franklin Graham. He continued in telling Starnes that he is especially concerned about the rise of socialism in America. It's incredible what the socialists are doing in this country, he said. The power that they have. Socialism is a procurer to communism. He pointed to recent decisions in California that effectively shut down churches and banned Christian traditions like singing hymns or reciting the Lord's Prayer. This is what the communists did in Eastern Europe, Graham warned. They shut the churches down. They didn't want the pastor's voice. He said, anybody that's a threat, you shut them down. The globally respected evangelist also reminded Starnes that thousands of pastors and priests across Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union were slaughtered in the name of communism. It's important for the church's voice to be heard, Graham noted. The politicians are going to have to see the church in a big way. Otherwise, they will never respect and they will never shut us up and shut us down. Wanted to share that with you. My personal appeal to you is not only to vote, pray before you vote, encourage others to vote, and remember even now daily, let us go before the throne and pray for God's mercy and his intervention in our time of need. Just a closing word. This program is brought to you by Lincoln Log Homes. We sell log kits. If you'll call me, Lincoln Log Homes in Kannapolis, North Carolina, toll free 800-848-3310, I'll talk with you personally. I'm Richard Schaff, CEO of Lincoln Log Homes, and your host on this program today. Goodbye until next week.